Thank you for watching the UN Brief, and don't forget to subscribe. This week, we interviewed Philip Rosedale, CEO and co-founder of Second Life. Thank you for watching the UN Brief, and don't forget to subscribe. Tell us a bit, walk us through how did the ideas came about and how did it start? Because you had this idea of creating hardware way before you actually launched the software company.
Well, when I was a kid, I really just became fascinated with the idea of making a virtual world, and specifically the idea of kind of simulating the physics of a world and then letting people build anything inside it so that it would kind of evolve more like the real world or a real world. And so that was something that just fascinated me. And then I was fortunate enough to graduate college and start working in software engineering and products right at the start of the internet. So sort of the internet was the basic sort of network that was needed to build this idea of a really large simulated world. And so the timing was perfect. The thing I had been thinking about as a kid was something that we could actually try to do, although I didn't start trying to build a virtual world right until 1999, 2000, right when the graphics, the 3D graphics chips became good enough to allow computers to maybe do such a thing.
Yes, that seems to be the challenge, right? It's capacity too, right? Nowadays, we do have more computer power in order to explore these technologies. So what you see now, because you stepped aside from Second Life for a bit, because it also peaked at a certain level of users. Although, tell us a little bit, because I remember in this discussion we had a couple of weeks ago on Twitter that you have said that it was actually more profitable because there is a revenue model which is based on sales of digital goods and real estate, digital real estate too.
That's right. So Second Life, as you said, it got to a peak size in about 2009. Which was about a million people. And now it's actually growing again, as you can imagine, during COVID. And as computers get faster, like you said, the world of hardware has kind of caught up a little bit with some of the ideas that are in Second Life. But the revenue model is something really interesting to consider. Second Life, over all these years, has made a good deal of money. It's been a very successful business while providing a virtual world for people. And the way that the business works is fees. It charges fees on transactions and on virtual land, kind of as a property tax on virtual land, and which is basically a hosting fee. So those fees add up to a really great business for the company. In fact, Second Life per person that's using it makes more money on an annual basis than YouTube does on advertising or Facebook does across its businesses on advertising. So it's possible to have a fees-based model that doesn't cause bad behavior and is still a great business.
Yeah, that's the other challenge we've been discussing too. As you've heard, the first tryouts on Facebook have already caused a stir that women were complaining they were sexually harassed because you have 3 tiers. Is that still true? Like movies, right? Where you can have PG-13 and you can have, a place where people are going to be swearing, there will be violence. You can watch that movie or not watch that movie. You're not going to let maybe your kids watch that movie. And how is that working now? Or what were the challenges when you were there before? Because I'm sure this was reflecting society, questions of sexual harassment or just bullying online. How did you work on that, and what's new?
Well, some of the latest things that are being experimented with by companies such as Facebook, as you say, are sort of centrally regulated in a single way. So there's typically as you see with other online services or social media, there's typically moderators that are reviewing everything that anyone complains about. And The problem with that, of course, is that it, as you said, it subjects everybody in the world to a single standard, which makes no sense. And if you go from 100 million to 1 billion people, it makes absolutely no sense, since the world is, an enormous place with many different local customs and cultural norms. Second Life, by comparison, has always attempted to be more like the real world. It's a kind of a spectrum between centralization and decentralization. Second Life is much more frequently moderated by the people that own the land themselves. And so the rules of what can happen in a certain place, as you said, are regulated by the people that either own the land or live there. And that causes there to be, just like in the real world, a variety of different, rules about being in there. You mentioned sort of three groups. Second Life today is sort of one big place. It's about the size of Los Angeles. So there isn't any concept of different large districts for different types of activities. It's just that individuals can set the controls the way they want in their local places. Second Life is also notably not a place for kids. We actually did have a version of Second Life for kids in the early years, but we ended up shutting it down. It wasn't really something that could compete with the larger space that was for everybody, or for everybody that was a grown-up. It's interesting to note that the couple of companies that are leading the way, teaching us about the possibility of this kind of metaverse discussion, those companies being Roblox, and then things like Minecraft or Fortnite, those are experiences exclusively for kids. They're not used by grown-ups yet. And I think this tells us something about the challenges that lie ahead. So Second Life has been successful for grown-ups, and I believe it's still the largest, and by certainly the most important experience to look at as we look forward to the metaverse. But most of the other experiences that are larger are exclusively for kids.
I see. So, because I think about the uses that it could have, enterprise uses, right? Like, I don't know, an NGO could create a virtual world where they could help train healthcare workers in Africa, or, what kind of training programs or uses that there would be for I see enterprise uses, right, of the United Nations agencies. As you probably heard, the Security Council, the UN Security Council, a couple of months ago had a session where they used VR in order to have the diplomats discuss a situation in one of the conflict zones. Usually they travel to these places, but because COVID and so on, so they apparently had a very positive impression of using that virtual mixed reality type of instrument to discuss, negotiate issues, whether they should, support this or that, or impose sanctions on one of the warring factions. So I can see that there could be wonderful uses in war-torn zones, unfortunately, but then we need to be there. And you can't be physically, or you put soldiers on harm's way or diplomats on harm's way. So what you see, or is there something like that planned? Or because leaving it open right now means that you have the challenge of making sure that it's a safe place for people who want to do such things, right? Or will you create some off-label or white label space?
I think that, as you said, groups like embassies, governments, the UN, politicians, all have experimented a little bit with using Second Life in those earlier years, and now are in some cases experimenting again with using VR headsets, as an alternative to sitting in front of the screen. I think that both of these face a basic challenge. If they're used for something very practical and specific, like learning a medical procedure, or perhaps attending a Security Council meeting, as you said, everybody can kind of do the onboarding and the training to get comfortable with the devices and actually get in there and have a useful experience. I think that is true in some cases today, but we're still not at the point with metaverse technology, whether you're talking about Second Life or you're talking about the latest, Facebook demonstrations with the VR goggles. We're not at the point yet where the average person would feel comfortable in the experience of communicating with somebody else as an avatar. And that's technology work that actually still needs to be done. It's one of the reasons why Second Life has a population of about 1 million people and not a population of 1 billion. There's still problems with making you and I comfortable enough to replace the video experience with an avatar experience.
And that's the other thing I wanted to know, why it couldn't be more realistic in terms of looking like a video. Is it possible, or get closer? Because I find it a little jarring sometimes to see people, it's like, right. Well, actually, Second Life is a better experience in the sense that you have the full body, right? With Meta, it was kind of really odd to have this half person. I mean, what does that mean? What you see is going to be possible in terms of changing, the way we look, because that has to do not only with technology too, but that's another point. But tell me about the technology first.
Yeah, you highlighted two different problems there. The one of not having legs is both funny, and it's also a great story about the challenges here. The problem is that if we give people a part of their body, but then we don't move it correctly. For example, when you slide forward in your chair versus when you lean forward at your hips, these two things mean very different things to someone. Leaning forward means that you're interested in what they're saying. You're leaning in, as we say, and VR devices don't actually know where your hips are. So when you move forward in a VR device, the only thing the device knows is that your head is moving forward. And so it has to make up some body movements. But of course, if you're, say, a diplomat and those body movements are incorrect, you're going to be very unsatisfied with the experience. On the other hand, as you say, not having legs is equally unacceptable and uncomfortable. There's another phenomena called the uncanny valley, in which as we create avatars that look increasingly like human beings, the closer we get to human beings, but not quite there yet, the more scary those avatars sometimes are. And so this uncanny valley phenomena is one of the reasons why movies today that are animated still frequently use animal or fantasy characters rather than human beings. And it's because the computer rendering is still not quite good enough for human beings. And so this is one of the problems with avatars used for communication online. We're not quite getting the amount of detail we'd like as individuals, but if we give that detail, then the face starts to look a little bit scary or zombie-like.
And what kind of skill sets you see are going to be needed to design things? You looking at the body movement, and dancers are perhaps great people to be around and understand and put sensors in order to develop the technology. So what you see is also now going forward in terms of robotics, people now working on emotions, focusing precisely just on emotions, right? To develop the robots and encase the avatars too.
I think that enabling people to communicate with emotion, with empathy, to understand each other, is really the big goal and mission, and should be, of all these online experiences. Technology can be used to build trust between people online, but of course, as we are perhaps more aware recently, it can also be used to destroy trust, which is, I think, the challenge that we face right now, at least as technologists, is repairing a lot of broken trust. I do think that movement of avatars, being able to convey nonverbal information, maybe even things like dance, are critical to trust building between people, as well as the rules of moderation that we touched on a little bit earlier, how people that don't know each other are able to have appropriate tension and consequences and experiences when they first meet in a virtual world. I think there's a lot of technical opportunities to do better at this. I think that just in the next few years, all the enthusiasm, plus of course COVID, will cause us to continue to invent better ways to use online communication. I hope, and it's what I hope I can have some contribution to, continue to have contribution to.
Thank you so much. Pleasure speaking with you. Philip Rosedale, one of the co-founders of Second Life. Is there anything else that we didn't touch upon that you'd like to comment on, or any announcements maybe that you have? Because tell me a little bit about the merger, because you were focusing on this other company that is more spatial sound, right? Which improves the
quality. That's High Fidelity. That's
High
right.
Fidelity.
Right. So what happened with High Fidelity and Second Life was High Fidelity originally built a full VR platform, which used the VR goggles. And In 2019, we looked at that market and we concluded that unfortunately we were far too early. And so we reduced our focus inside High Fidelity to only spatial audio, which is this amazing technology that we've built that lets you have a cocktail party. And if you're wearing, stereo headphones, it sounds exactly like that. You can hear everybody off in the distance and move around in the space. So High Fidelity has been licensing that spatial audio technology to companies like Clubhouse, for example, who are using it to make their group experiences sound better. And what we decided to do was take the part of High Fidelity that had been working on VR headsets and 3D and move that group over to Second Life, or I should say back to Second Life for several of the people that were there. So we made the High Fidelity company smaller and focused only on spatial audio. And we invested in and moved people to Second Life to keep working on Second Life because we think Second Life is still the best system in town and the one that's most likely to do good.
Yeah, I look forward to using it in the future. I like the idea of being able to choreograph using it.
Absolutely.
Anyway, thank you so much for the time. And I look forward to continuing the conversation, and all the best. Me posted on developments too.
Thank you very much for having me. It was great.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, Maya. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching the UN Brief, and don't forget to subscribe,